Welcome to the R.E.C.A.P podcast. We are here today again with Volodymyr from DigiShares, who is legal counsel there. And we wanted to talk about one of the topics that we did not get a chance to talk about in the first episode, which is about KYC and how KYC differs across the different jurisdictions.
Thank you, Stefan, for inviting me again. Always happy to be here. And yes, certainly, KYC is a big subject to cover.
So can you talk us through at the beginning? So what is KYC? What is common amongst jurisdictions? And then maybe also, so I understand there's something like the FATF and whatever that kind of does the rules there, but then also what is uncommon about the jurisdictions and how do you have to do that?
Yes, so well, KYC stands for Know Your Customer. So it's a verification process in which you understand who your customer is. You basically verify their identity, and there could be some other things that you would have to do depending on your risk assessment. So this is, part of anti-money laundering legislation in order to be able to prevent and address the risks of money laundering with regards to various obliged entities, especially in financial sector.
What is an obliged entity?
Financial institutions or just companies or individuals that are raising funds from the public, for instance.
Okay, so it could be really everyone, right? That's a bit the issue, that everyone who deals with a lot of money can be an obliged entity. So that makes it a bit tricky, partially. Yeah.
Yes, certainly. There's a lot of there's a broad definition of who could be covered under this.
Mm. And so it's about AML, but then there's other things that are hijacked. So AML is about the proceeds of crime, but then it's also about terrorist finance. So that it's a bit the other way around. So AML is where does the money come from, but CTF is where does the money go to? And then more generally also politically exposed persons. So if people who are running a local regime and that they don't grab assets and whatever, these kind of things. So these are this is the purpose of these KYC rules. And what are these KYC rules? So what do you have to do as an issuer, as a promoter, or first of all, who has to do something and what do they have to do?
Well, in the context of tokenization or security token offerings, the issuer would have to ensure that investors that participate in the offering have been appropriately verified, in compliance with the AML laws of the jurisdiction where they established or where the offering takes place. And what they would have to do as part of that process is obtain identity details from investors and verify them against a reliable and objective source in order to establish the identity of individuals.
And when you say the issuer, who is the issuer? The real estate developer, or can this be the platform where this happens? Can you outsource this?
Yes, it certainly can be outsourced. So it depends whether, if it's in case of real estate developer, if the real estate developer runs the entity that has been tokenized and offers the securities to the market himself, then they would have to do it themselves. But of course, if it is listed on a platform, then that platform would have to, there's the responsibility of that platform to ensure that the KYC has been verified. Also, typical practice in the industry is to involve a third party who is a licensed KYC AML provider, so providing services of verification.
Licensed meaning what?
Oh, I mean, not officially licensed.
That's an interesting question. So
yeah, so not in most cases actually you don't have to be specifically licensed for this. It's just that your designated business is provision of this service.
So someone just has to do it, but then if they are not licensed, it also means that ultimately the issuer is responsible, yeah? So
yes, of course, the liability.
So if they do something wrong, then that is still your problem. So you probably want to be a little bit careful on who you get there. And are there differences in the different jurisdictions? And by the way, so we're at the moment, we're primary market. I want to talk about secondary market in a moment, because this is obviously a whole other kettle of fish. But sort of in primary markets, are there differences between jurisdictions, what you have to do as KYC, or is this relatively homogeneous across jurisdictions?
Well, there are things that are very similar. The fact that you have to do KYC and what really KYC is very similar across jurisdictions. But there are differences in the intricacies of the process. So you mentioned FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, and so they've issued guidelines, and the new travel rule that usually would apply to banking.
Sorry, travel rule? What is travel rule?
Travel rule is essentially that you need to be able to know the source of funds and transmit that information across different providers. So if we're talking about virtual assets, that would be the VASPs, virtual asset service providers, that would need to obtain information about who the funds or crypto assets are coming from and who are they going to, and be able to transmit that information across the whole chain of the transaction, so that essentially it's traceable.
And can this be, the source of funds is Black Box Limited in Cayman Islands, or do you need to go through the ultimate owner on those?
No. So a particular VASP, an individual VASP, would not need to go all the way to the ultimate owner. They would just need to, at the level of the transaction, know who has been transferring and who has the funds been going to.
Okay, so Black Box Limited in Cayman Island is completely legitimate source of funds for these kind of things, or that's the way it works. So you can have corporate entities who do these kind of things, and then, or do you then need to understand the corporate identity better, or you're fine at the level of the WASP where you are?
The challenge is that a lot of these funds could be coming from, for instance, decentralized finance application, DeFi applications, or exchanges where nobody has gone through any KYC verification.
Okay, there's no KYC at all. So if it's sort of we're even the next level, it's not even black box finance, but it's just an Ethereum address
exactly.
That is coming. That's the biggest problem there. Yeah.
It's a big problem of how to practically, for the industry, how to practically implement this, because if imagine Uniswap is required to do this, they would need to KYC at some point their users, well,
their users obviously even harder, because Uniswap is just a set of smart contracts on the platform, and at least in the Uniswap v2 or v3, I believe they're immutable, so they can't change anything on those smart contracts. So
yes, exactly.
So that's even harder. So the good news there seems to be that your KYC requirements are similar across jurisdictions. They are still relatively basic, and you can outsource them. Yes.
Yes, that's right. But I was just getting to the fact that implementation of the FATF travel rule has been varying across jurisdictions. So jurisdictions have already attempted to implement them, others haven't. So there is a difference in this. And the difference for KYC AML processes lies with the crypto payments, mostly, rather than fiat. So in some jurisdictions, crypto payments not necessarily require, for instance, the presence of a payment intermediary in order to have the payments done in a compliant way. But in others, for instance, like in Germany, if you fall under securities regulations and by virtue of that under the AML regulations, then that would mean that you would have to have a payment provider that would have to be interposed in the process also with the crypto, which kind of, on the one hand, defeats the point of a lot of the cryptocurrencies that try to disintermediate transactions, but it also establishes a very strict control over the flow of funds. And actually, in this way, you could definitely implement the travel rule if you have an intermediary present.
Okay, so it's not that easy. And any differences in secondary versus primary?
Not so much. So I mean, in secondary, everybody has to be KYC'd in order to participate in an exchange, and all this information is transmitted already. So in secondary, it's easier if we're talking about entities that are licensed and not part of the wild west of decentralized finance.
So when it goes over exchanges, the exchanges have to do their KYC, and if you do a private deal, if you just agree with someone, so you're a private person, I, Stefan Lösch, just bought these whatever $100,000 worth of tokens. I want to send them to you, Volodymyr. We met on an internet bulletin board. We just have a we have some way of exchanging these things in a trustless manner. Do I need to KYC you?
So as the seller of the instrument,
or as a buyer? Either side, does either side have to do KYC?
No, generally you would not need to be, this would not fall within the scope of the regulations, but of course I can't speak for every single jurisdiction, so there could be some.
Okay, so chances are we are good, so we can just sell these tokens. We have a lot of private liquidity. Once it's organized liquidity, then there needs to be some more.
Yes, certainly.
Volodymyr, thank you very much. This was an interesting snippet of what KYC means across jurisdictions. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Great as always.